In September 2011, there was a meeting of the IIF in Washington. It was a closed session with no media in attendance. But what occurred there, a high-temperature squabble resulting in the guest of honor leaving, leaked. The guest was Mark Carney, who that year also became chair of the Financial Stability Board, an international body created by the G20 to help monitor the global financial system and recommend measures to make it more secure. By then, Carney had become a financial star who would later be the first non-Brit to serve as governor of the Bank of England. He was the kind of speaker IIF members wanted to hear. Also in the room was another financial star, arguably the world's leading banker, Jamie Dimon, chairman and CEO of JPMorgan Chase & Co. Dimon became CEO in 2005 and remains so in 2025. Growing the bank while navigating financial crises, a global pandemic, and personal issues like cancer and emergency heart surgery, Dimon is a force in business and a thoughtful commentator on economies and global affairs. JPMorgan not only survived the crisis under Dimon, but also did well by purchasing Bear Stearns in March 2008 and Washington Mutual 6 months later at the height of the crisis. In 2023, it would again be opportunistic, buying First Republic Bank during a mini-banking crisis. Carney, meanwhile, was born in the Northwest Territories and attended Harvard. He was the hockey team's backup goalie, and Oxford. He then worked at Goldman Sachs for 13 years before returning to Canada as a leading finance department official, Bank of Canada official, and then Bank of Canada governor. Until winning the leadership of Canada's Liberal Party in 2025 and replacing Justin Trudeau as Prime Minister, he was chair of Bloomberg, as well as Brookfield Asset Management. Carney is smart and eloquent. So is Dimon, and neither is a shrinking violet. One participant recalled that the group was meeting in an ornate room at one of Washington's large museums. The bankers were on edge, given that regulators and central banks wanted to strengthen the regulatory net. While the IIF wanted to be open about the industry's weaknesses and mistakes, it recognized that liquidity, capital, and compensation had to be addressed. There was also a view in the room that regulators were moving too fast, and credit could be choked further while economies were still weak due to the crisis. Charles Dallara said the regulatory pendulum was swinging too far, and regulations were not being developed with a nuanced sense of the economy. The preferred approach, according to Dallara, was for the banks to get their own acts together before regulators did it for them. He added that the history of the Institute was such that while these meetings could be adversarial, concerns were voiced with a certain degree of politeness and civility. Waugh says he was chair of the meeting and that he sat beside Dimon, and that Jamie and Mark had a back and forth. That was Waugh's polite way of saying there was an altercation. They were arguing, he says, and both are opinionated people. A key participant in the room described the interchange in starker terms. Dimon ripped into him, Carney, in a particularly vicious fashion, they said, describing it as a cringeworthy moment. 14 years later, Dimon challenged descriptions of the exchange. I wouldn't call it heated, he said, saying he was just being direct. I was probably less civil than Charles thought I should be. So be it. Dimon was pushing back against Carney's view on tougher banking regulations, the post-crisis requirement for banks to hold more capital as a buffer against losses, calling the new rules cockamamie nonsense. He charged they were designed by regulators, academics, and others who didn't know the reality of markets. And I still think they're cockamamie, and they're still in place, Dimon exclaims. Obviously, Waugh says, Jamie was disrespecting the role of the regulator, and Carney took it personally because he was, in that capacity. At an international gathering of hundreds of financial firms from dozens of countries, Intent on mopping up after a U.S.-generated financial crisis, Dimon was calling the new rules anti-American, which he still does. I was probably the one person who was willing to speak up. It would appear that there was zero introspection over the fact that U.S. banking practices had been central to the problem in the first place. But many in the room, hardly wallflowers themselves, were shocked. We watched it. It was a two-way conversation. The rest of us weren't involved in it, Waugh says. If there was a banker certain people looked up to during the crisis, it was Dimon, for his shrewd, articulate, level-headed approach. But on this day, the view was he'd overstepped. Carney, though, didn't need training wheels. A pugnacious, sharp-elbowed character in his own right, with an intellect to match, he was having none of it. In Waugh's retelling, Carney basically told him, Dimon, to fuck off. At the highest levels of global finance, emotions were running hot. News accounts reported that Waugh intervened to lower the temperature, to no avail. Waugh downplays the media dispatches, which described him as a referee. It seemed as though Carney felt abused. He pulled together his papers, and other participants said, "I'm not going to sit here and take this," was the sense. Carney packed up and walked out. For his part, Dimon says, "I remember him getting annoyed and leaving," but adds that he does not recall Carney swearing. Afterwards, Waugh says he spoke firmly with Dimon. I said, "Thanks, Jamie. That's my regulator that you just pissed off or upset." Dimon didn't dispute Waugh's recollection. While Carney wasn't technically Canada's banking regulator, OSFI is, he was governor of its central bank, which controls monetary policy and promotes safe, sound, and efficient financial systems. Dimon's comments, in Waugh's view, were simply out of line. Our guest, Mark Carney, had left, and he was our guest, and that's no way to treat a guest, Waugh says. He phoned Carney later to smooth things out. Dimon also says that he spoke to Carney afterwards. "I probably even apologized if I felt I was a little harsh, okay? But being harsh and being right are two different things." Dimon characterized the incident as a little kerfuffle and maintained he has a good relationship with Carney. I've spoken to him since he became Prime Minister. Footnote: Carney did not respond to requests for an interview. End of footnote.